In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. On Thursday, May 5th, 2011, a woman named Amy pulled up to the subway in Carroll, Iowa around 8:15 in the morning to start her shift. But right away, Amy knew something was wrong. Dawn Allen, her manager, wasn't there. So Dawn, who was 50 years old, had worked at that subway for 21 years, and she always unlocked the store each weekday morning. And in the 21 years that she had been there, she had never missed work. She was never late. And even when she was sick, Dawn was there to open the store. Now, Amy called the store's owner to see if maybe there was a reason Dawn wasn't there, like maybe there was some misunderstanding, but there was no explanation. She should be there. Amy insisted they report her missing to the police. Now, in an article written by Tom Alex and Reed Forgave in the Des Moines Register, Dawn's son Greg is quoted as saying, "From the moment the police department called me and said she hadn't been seen in the morning on the day she didn't show up for work, it starts with the normal thoughts. Was she in a car accident? Was she at the house and got hurt? The first thing you think of are the simple things, and you just don't know." In a Des Moines Register article published on Saturday, May 7th, Police Chief Jeff Kaler called Dawn's disappearance very, very unusual, given her past history of reliability and connections to family and her employer. Kaler said, "We're not saying foul play was involved, but it is a distinct possibility." That same day, authorities issued a notice to the public asking anyone with information on Dawn's whereabouts to come forward. They needed to figure out where and when she was last seen. During the initial investigation, Chief Kaler, who had known Dawn for more than 25 years, enlisted the help of the State Division of Criminal Investigation, which committed 4 agents to the search. Now, initially, Kaler used local and statewide newspapers, television, and radio stations to spread the word about Dawn's disappearance to hopefully generate tips, but also to suppress some rumors of supposed sightings of her. So some initial tips had come in suggesting Dawn had been seen at rest stops, but they were able to rule out those tips, and so they were trying to kind of quash any more of those. And despite some recent struggles in her life, including a recent divorce and the sudden death of one of her sons, Chief Kaler knew Dawn wasn't the type of person to walk away from her job or her life unannounced. Now, on the morning Dawn was reported missing, police were able to locate her vehicle. It was found abandoned in the parking lot of the Piranha Club, which was a nightclub in Carroll, Iowa. During the initial search of her vehicle, there wasn't anything that stuck out, but they took it in for processing. Investigators told the public they believed the car was parked there after the club closed at 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday night, and they don't believe Dawn went into the club. According to the Daily Times Herald, in tracing Dawn's last known whereabouts, investigators were able to verify that a neighbor had last seen her Wednesday evening around 8 p.m. at her house. So that was just before the day she went missing or was reported missing. There didn't appear to be a struggle at her home or where her vehicle was found. So while this did give investigators a start, they were also trying to see what information they could gather from Dawn's cell phone activity. Now, Dawn's cell phone records show that her voicemail messages had been accessed around 3:30 a.m. on Thursday, but that the phone was actually turned off just 2 hours later at 5:30 a.m. And that would have been just a few hours before her shift started at Subway. This initial information provided a solid starting point, but there were a lot of pieces of the puzzle missing. Investigators needed more. They needed information from someone very familiar with Dawn's last known whereabouts. 4 days after Dawn's disappearance, on Monday, May 9th, the Daily Times Herald reported that authorities had identified a potential material witness who may know where to find Dawn, but that they hadn't been able to contact the person. And that person in question was a 54-year-old man living in Rolfe, Iowa, James Snovelle. Dawn and James Snovelle had been casually dating since they met online the previous December, so December of 2010. Greg said he met James in February of 2011. Greg was quoted in the Daily Nonpareil as saying he would open doors for mom or offer to cook food. He even helped her mow the lawn a couple of times. He just seemed like an average guy. He never really got upset about anything. Now, Greg said that the two had occasional dinner and movie dates, but that Dawn wasn't looking for a serious relationship. And now remember, she had kind of recently just gone through a divorce. And it might be possible that James was looking for more, but Greg said he seemed okay with waiting. Greg said he seemed like he just wanted to spend time with her. So on the 9th, when police identified him as a witness, they also said he may be traveling in Iowa, Missouri, or Kansas in a red Mercury Sable. And what was later learned was that police had been in contact with James from the very beginning. Both Chief Kaler and Greg had spoken to James the day Dawn was reported missing. Greg also said he spoke with James shortly after the search began, and he told reporters that James sounded shocked about the disappearance and said he planned to travel to Carroll to help with the search, but he never showed up. Chief Kaler and investigators spoke with James several times in the days following Dawn's disappearance, but Kaler is quoted in the Daily Times Herald as saying he was obviously avoiding coming in to talk to us. Now, what the public didn't know at the time was that in those early days of the investigation, those close to Dawn and investigators began realizing there was a lot about James that they didn't know or that he had outright lied about. First, Greg said James told him that he had been married before, but had been separated from his wife for several years. But that was not true. James was still married. He and his wife lived in Rolfe, Iowa. In fact, a neighbor who was later interviewed by the Des Moines Register said he had lived next to James and his wife for several years, and he said both of them were very nice people. Now, second, James had said that his job involved making deliveries, but investigators found that he had actually been unemployed since February of 2011. And now it's like unclear in my research like how many people knew that, but it seemed to be a surprise. And third, Dawn's friends and coworkers also immediately revealed to the police when Dawn went missing that James was pretty controlling. In an article from the Daily Times Herald, it's reported that the day Dawn went missing, Amy, the subway employee who initially knew something was wrong, and other coworkers went to the police station to tell investigators about Dawn and James' relationship. They said James was overbearing and would often make sexually suggestive comments. Disturbingly, they recalled a time when James tracked Dawn down to a Walmart after she didn't respond to his messages. Additionally, Kansas court documents obtained months after Dawn went missing showed that James had been sending her hundreds of text messages each day leading up to her disappearance. Now, with all of this, plus the fact that investigators could tell he was avoiding coming in to speak, and because he had been using multiple prepaid cell phones with his number blocked, it was enough for investigators to know that they needed to talk to James. So, investigators were able to determine that James was heading to Kansas, and police in Iowa let law enforcement there know. So, I'm going to read directly from this article by Jared Strong, published in the Daily Times Herald, and I have relied on his reporting heavily. He did great reporting on this case. So I'm going to read directly from that, and that describes what happened on Monday, May 9th, 2011, when Kansas authorities found James Snovelle. Coffee County Sheriff Randy Rogers hunts for deer in the woods near South Big Creek, and he knew it was a good place to hide. Iowa law enforcement officials said Snovelle might be in the area and that he had a rifle and a handgun. Rogers' unmarked truck crept down the muddy road about a half mile to a clearing where he caught a glimpse of Snovelle's red sedan. Rogers threw his truck into reverse and backed away at about 3:30 p.m. He called for backup, and within 10 minutes, a state highway patrol plane was circling overhead. More than a dozen county and state officers converged on the area. Some of the officers positioned themselves in the surrounding farm fields. Others were ready with dogs for a foot chase. Snovelle, apparently spooked by the plane, drove his car back toward the highway but got stuck about halfway there. A trooper in the plane saw Snovelle ditch the vehicle and run back into the woods. He emerged on the south side of the woods, saw an officer waiting there, and ran back in. Snovelle made his way past where he had tried to hide his vehicle. He ran on a road through the woods across a field and cut through the bush that led to South Big Creek. He waded through the water toward his old farmstead. The water reached his sternum. 3 troopers and a sheriff's deputy ordered him to surrender. The next moment, Snovelle pulled a revolver and shot and killed himself. James Snovelle's suicide ended what investigators believed was the best shot they had at finding out what happened to Don. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Chief Kaler was reportedly reluctant to say publicly whether they believed he was responsible for Don's disappearance, but over time, as more information became available, it became clear that he likely was, and that foul play was likely involved. It was later reported that neighbors had seen Snovelle sneak into Dawn's home the day before she went missing while she was at work. He apparently walked through an alley to get to the backyard of the house and went into the garage. The neighbors apparently didn't see his red Mercury Sable in the area, and I'm not sure if this was told to police immediately, but it was reported on publicly following his death. Those hundreds of messages James had been sending Dawn leading up to her disappearance, he sent none in the days after. Years after Dawn's disappearance and Snovelle's death, it was revealed that 2 weeks before Dawn went missing, Snovelle had fraudulently deposited $3,600 with a forged check from her credit card. Additionally, though initial reporting indicated that police found nothing obvious in Dawn's car, which, if you remember, they found abandoned in a nightclub parking lot, later reporting says that the officer that drove the vehicle to the police department had to stretch to reach the pedals. And now this officer was 5'10". Dawn was 5'2". But James, he was well over 6 feet tall. What police were also able to determine was that James Snovelle had been in Carroll, Iowa, the day before Dawn disappeared. The next day, he made his way back to Rolfe, Iowa, where he lived with his wife. And after that, he drove all the way back down to Kansas. He then apparently made his way all the way back to Iowa before again fleeing to Kansas, where he then took his own life on Monday, May 9th. Now, more about James' double life was also revealed, and Dawn was apparently not the only woman he was dating behind his wife's back. There were several others. In an article published in the Daily Nonpareil over a year after Dawn's disappearance, Chief Kaler said they identified at least 7 other women that James was involved with. One woman named Mary met Snovelle on a dating website, just like Dawn. Mary said his profile handle was something like KS Wildman. Mary said she traveled with Snovelle 3 or 4 times on one of his work deliveries, and she said she never felt threatened by him and that she had no clue he was still with his wife. Mary was quoted as saying, "He made me laugh, he made me forget about the things I was going through." She said after finding out about Snovelle's wife, along with everything else that happened, she ended up seeking therapy. She said she hopes that Dawn is found so her family and everyone can have closure. Now, Snovelle had connections to the land that he ultimately died in. He grew up in that area. It was near the old farmstead he lived at. The very creek he died in was one he used to fish in as a boy. Now, disturbingly, James' older brother Raymond told Jared Strong with the Daily Times Herald that James had talked ominously about his own death just weeks before Dawn went missing and before he took his own life. Raymond said James visited his siblings in Kansas a month prior and said, "If anything ever happens to me, this gun belongs to you." Now, Raymond asked him, what do you mean by that? But James never responded. He said that was the last time he spoke to his brother, and that his brother actually left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. Jared Strong writes in the Daily Times Herald article, he rubbed his eye and thought for a moment. I hope to hell Jim didn't harm anybody. Now, as shocking as Snovelle's death was, investigators had to keep moving forward with their investigation and find any clues as to where Don was. So, authorities in Kansas searched James Snovelle's vehicle following his death. They located 2 guns, ammunition, a knife, 10 $20 bills, 3 cell phones, 3 rings, 2 earrings, and a Kansas road map, among other items. They also canvassed the area where he died, but found nothing. Authorities in Iowa described the search for Don as one to find a needle in a haystack, but worse. Officers walked railroad tracks, drainage ditches, and other areas in Carroll, Iowa. They asked the public for help in the search, asking them to check any area of their property they might not have been to in a while. The task was seemingly impossible. The distance Snovelle had traveled from when Don went missing to when he died spanned at least 7 counties, 3 states, and hundreds of miles. I saw one snippet in a 2012 article in the Daily Times Herald that in the early days of the investigation, a farmer in Kansas had found a shovel that matched the description of one James Snovelle's wife later said was missing from their Rolfe home. Now, I have to assume this farm and area were searched, but I haven't found any other details, and that is seemingly the best lead that was at least reported on. 6 weeks after Dawn went missing, authorities announced they were no longer actively searching for her, though they still urged the public to report any tips. Years following Dawn's disappearance, she was declared illegally dead, and authorities do believe she was murdered. Jared Strong wrote for the Daily Times Herald, Allen was a likable boss at Subway. She joked often with her coworkers who sometimes coaxed her into going out to dinner or making a trip to Coon Rapids for figure-8 races. She talked glowingly about her grandchildren, loved to read and bargain shop, watched TV with a warm bath, and hated politics and country music, which, she complained, was always about somebody's dead dog. She was coworker Amy's confidant. Amy, a single mom, would condemn herself each time her teenage daughter got into trouble or didn't come home at night. Allen would say to her, "Suck it up. There are some things in life you don't have control over. Life has to go on." Dawn Allen was last seen at her home on Wednesday, May 4th, around 8 p.m., wearing bright blue knit pants and a multicolored shirt. She is 5 foot 2 inches tall, weighing approximately 140 pounds. She has 3 tattoos, one on her right ankle in the shape of a bracelet or charm, a Tinkerbell tattoo on her back right shoulder blade, and one on her front waistline. Her ears are double pierced in both ears. She wore a silver watch that had a diamond at the 12 o'clock spot, a silver white gold ring with a solitaire diamond around 3 carats in size, and she carried a large bright orange purse and also took blood pressure medication. I didn't find anything saying if any of the jewelry found in Snovelle's vehicle belonged to Dawn. If you have any information at all about Dawn Allen or find anything on your property in central and western Iowa, northwestern Missouri, or eastern Kansas that might be connected, please call the Carroll Police Department at 712-792-3536, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations at 712-252-0507, or submit a tip online through Crime Stoppers. Lastly, if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse or intimate partner violence, there is help available. You can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline by calling 1-800-799-7233, by texting START to 88788, or by visiting thehotline.org to find local resources and learn more about the warning signs of abuse, why people abuse, and how to develop a safety plan. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself.